Okay, so thank you everyone for joining me for this seed saving workshop presented by Local Seeds. I'm Daniel. I run Local Seeds, which is a marketplace for seed savers. So I've been growing veggies for about 5 years. I have a small raised bed at home and also a plot at a community garden nearby. And I started Local Seeds in the middle of the pandemic last year after I watched a couple of documentaries about the loss of seed diversity, which I'll talk a bit more about shortly. So here's what I'm planning to cover during this workshop. I'll start by going over the science of seeds. Then I'll talk about some of the reasons why we may want to save seeds. I'll then give you some tips on how to get started in case you haven't yet. I'll then play some videos to demonstrate the process of saving seeds from a couple of different plants, lettuce and tomatoes. Now, these were chosen in particular because they're easy to start with, but also quite different examples of seed saving. I'll also briefly discuss cross-pollination, which is where things can get a bit tricky. So we discuss some ways to prevent cross-pollination. And then I'll talk about what you can do with your saved seeds. So obviously including swapping seeds. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask at any time. This workshop is meant to be interactive. Also, I may not be able to answer all your questions, but if anyone else listening in would like to contribute an answer or make any comments, please feel free to do so as well. So starting with the science of seeds. A seed is basically a young plant that is resting inside a protective coating until the conditions are right for it to grow into a plant. Fully developed seeds contain 3 basic parts: the embryo, endosperm, which is the food for the plant, and seed coat. The embryo is the part of the seed that develops into a plant. It contains the embryonic root, the radicle, embryonic stem, and 1 or 2 seed leaves, the cotyledons. These provide the plant with its first food until it grows its true leaves, so the plant can begin to photosynthesize and produce its own food by itself. So for a seed to germinate, it just needs the right conditions, so the right temperature, water, and oxygen. Plants produce flowers to make seeds. To make a seed, a flower must be pollinated. Pollen from the male part of one flower travels to the female part of another flower where the seeds are made. Once the pollen makes its way inside the female flower, it connects with the ovaries, which form fruits and produce seeds. Many plants have both male and female parts inside one flower and may be able to self-pollinate. Others require help from the wind or insects to carry the pollen from one flower to another, or from one part of the flower to another. So why save seeds? The vegetables and fruits we eat today are the result of many years of a careful selection of plants. So these plants carry certain desirable traits, such as nutritional value, ease of cultivation, resistance to pests, and appearance. And this selection was only possible due to an enormous variety of plants that were available at the time to be crossbred. Unfortunately, in the last century, over 90% of the seed variety used for food production has been lost. One reason for that is that many of the most popular varieties consumed today are patented and cannot be saved or crossbred. Now, bear in mind, this is according to a study from 1983 by an organization called Rural Advancement Foundation International, and it's published on National Geographic in 2011. And according to the article, there weren't any more recent studies. Now, this is now especially concerning since our climate is changing. And without seed diversity, it would be a lot more difficult to breed new varieties able to adapt to a changing climate. Many of the commercial seeds available today are bred for perfect appearance, long shelf life, and uniform ripening rather than taste and nutritional value. They're also developed for widespread adaptability rather than any particular climate conditions. Now, when you save seeds from your homegrown plants, you're effectively selecting their unique traits for the next generation of plants. This can include features that make them desirable for you, such as flavor and texture, but also their ability to grow well in your local climate and resist pests. Over time, your seeds will continue to improve, adapting to your climate and producing higher quality plants and produce. This is a photo of the community garden where I have a plot in. So I'm sure you're convinced by now if you weren't already, but how can you get started? So here's some tips for beginners. My first tip is to start with open-pollinated seeds. Open-pollinated seeds are seeds that will retain their characteristics or breed true when they self-pollinate or are pollinated by another member of the same variety. This is in contrast to hybrid seeds, which are cross between two different varieties, and the resulting plants may not produce viable seeds. My next tip is to start with the easy ones. So lettuce and tomato are great because they self-pollinate and require little or no isolation to prevent cross-pollination. And you don't need many plants to produce a lot of seeds. Now, just because you can produce a lot of seeds with just one plant, it doesn't mean you should. Growing more plants of the same variety will give you more options to choose from in terms of the desirable traits that you're looking to carry over for the next generation. Another tip is to prefer heirloom varieties. So heirloom seeds are seeds that have been passed down through generations of a plant because their produce is valued for the flavor, productivity, hardness, or adaptability rather than for commercial reasons. They may have unique colors, textures, or tastes. They are hard to produce in large quantities. Finally, do some research about the specific variety that you're looking to save. Learn how to identify when the seeds are mature, how to harvest the seeds, and how to dry and properly store them. While some techniques are similar between different plants, it can also vary quite a bit. So we'll demonstrate this process for lettuce and tomatoes next. Now, to demonstrate the process of saving lettuce seeds, I'll play back a few videos from Jenny, who is also on the call. Thanks, Jenny. Who's a featured grower on Local Seeds and kindly offered to demonstrate her process for this workshop.
Hi everyone, Jenny from Seaford Seeds here. I do hope you're enjoying the show so far. Today I'm going to talk to you about collecting and saving lettuce seeds. Here's some of my lettuce grown from seed. You can see there's a few different varieties in there. And they're still going on nicely, not quite bolted yet. However, over here we'll find some that have already moved on. Once the lettuce has started to bolt, it will get tall and thin, and quickly the leaves will become bitter. So you'll know when if they're no longer viable to eat. Each lettuce flower only opens once in its lifetime, and then if it doesn't get pollinated, won't produce any seeds, but those that do will become seeds in the next few weeks. So we'll come back and have a look then. See, this morning there's some flowers come out. These ones will only be out today, and if the bees come, then we'll get some more seeds. Here's some that are nearly ready to fly, so they become fluffy at the top and the seeds form underneath. If you want to pick them, it's best to pick them individually at this stage, so that the other buds that are still forming can keep going. Alternatively, you can chop the whole head off and then put them in a paper bag and wait for them to mature Some of them will, but obviously it's better that you leave them on the plant for as long as you can. Just be mindful that when you pick the buds, lettuce have a milky substance that gets pretty sticky, so wear gloves. Here's some seeds that I picked a few months ago, and they're now quite dried out, and you can see that they're starting to actually loosen off. Best thing to do is get a strainer, but it needs to be fairly open weave, and a bowl to catch them in, and then just rub them across to loosen the heads off. You can see them starting to drop into the container then. Because of the light fluffiness of them, sometimes it's good to wear a mask as well, because it can get a bit in your nose. Keep going until you've got as many seeds off, and then you can actually go through pod by pod and see how you go. You can see that for the most part the seeds have just dropped off, just been gently rubbed, but for the ones that sort of stay stuck in the pod, just simply grab hold of some and just pull the actual seeds out. Can't do that one-handed, so I'll have to, well, you have to work it out yourself. Once you've got all the seeds out and there's still a fair bit of fluff left, then you can start threshing the seeds through a finer sieve. Best to do this outside, as I say. You can see all the fluff collecting there, it just gets stuck in your throat. So I'll go and do that now. Okay, so after the usual shenanigans with winnowing in the wind and blowing light seeds around, top tip here is to always make sure that you winnow over some fertile ground, so that at least if you spill the seeds like I just did, you will end up with something growing in your garden, which is the ultimate objective. So we've got some fairly nice clean seed there, actually. It didn't come out too badly. These are cos lettuces from my neighbour's garden, so I'll be packaging those up and sending some back to her. Hope you've enjoyed this little endeavour into lettuce seeds. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. So as we saw the great demonstration from Jenny of the process to save lettuce seeds. So in summary, you need to wait for your lettuce plant to bolt, which generally happens as the weather gets hotter, but it can happen for other factors as well. A good rule of thumb is that when plants are at the end of the life cycle or under some kind of stress, they will attempt to produce seeds before they die. Once the lettuce has flowered, it should get pollinated. Then you need to wait for the seed pods to mature before you can collect, dry, and store. Okay, so now we'll talk about saving tomato seeds. So tomato flowers get pollinated by wind or any kind of vibration. So it's usually recommended to shake the plant a little bit every now and then once it has flowers to pollinate them. Once it gets pollinated, the fruit forms from the flower's ovary with the seeds inside it. Now, one thing that's special about tomato seeds is that they're encased in a little gel sac to inhibit them from sprouting early. This growth inhibitor ensures that the seed is properly preserved until the conditions are right for the seed to germinate. In nature, tomato fruits would fall to the ground and rot, removing the sprout inhibitor that is the gel sac around each seed, and then germinate, resulting in new plants. So to save tomato seeds, we can mimic this process by fermenting the seeds. So now I'll play back some videos I recorded of this process. Okay, so first step is to pick ripe tomatoes from your best plants. So here I picked a few Tommy Toe cherry tomatoes to save seeds from. These were actually grown from my own saved seeds, so they are the second generation, and they've been pretty successful in my veggie patch. So here I sliced them in the middle between the point where the fruits were attached to the plant and the flower end. This makes it easier to scoop out the seeds with a spoon. Then you just need to put the seeds in a jar or glass. So I'll move the video a bit forward because it's a lot of scooping out here. Yeah, so then just putting the seeds in a jar or glass. And then adding a bit of water. So water isn't essential and it actually slows the fermentation a bit. So you don't want to add too much like I did there. I could probably add less. But adding water makes it easier to spot floating seeds, which may not be viable. Then you just need to cover it with a cloth or a paper towel, or you can also cover with the lid of the jar just to protect it and cover any bad smell once it starts fermenting. You can then leave it alone for a week or so, or up to 2 weeks, I think. You should then start to see a layer of mold build up and maybe some bubbles as well. And the seeds would generally go down to the bottom, sink down to the bottom. Now, once you have a layer of mold and some bubbles, it indicates the fermentation process is complete. Now, in my video, I didn't have a full layer of mold or bubbles. That's just because I was a bit impatient and I was late in my preparations for this workshop. So don't mind me, but it should still work. The next step is to rinse the seeds and clean it well so that you get rid of any bits of the tomato gel sac. So they are just getting rid of those bits of mold. And then we'll just put it in a strainer or sieve. And you may want to scoop out any floating seeds that may not be viable. And just, rinse it and clean it well to get rid of those bits of the tomato. And as you can see, they look pretty clean and separated from the gel sac. And finally, just transferring it to a baking paper or tea towel to dry. You may want to avoid paper towel since the paper can stick to the seeds. And just make sure to separate the seeds well to avoid getting them stuck together as they dry. You want to let it dry for at least 10 days in a cool, dry, and dark spot before storing it in a sealed container. So in summary, process of saving tomato seeds starts by selecting the fruits from your best tomatoes, carefully removing the seeds, putting them into a jar or glass. You can then fill it with a bit of water. Water may slow the fermentation, so avoid adding it too much. It isn't essential, but it helps you spot floating seeds. Once you have a layer of mold at the top, the fermentation should be complete. You can then shake and rinse the seeds to separate them from the gel sacs, and then finally let them dry on a baking paper or a tea towel for at least 10 days. Okay, so now that we've talked about lettuce and tomato, I'll just go over some more general tips about saving seeds. Here's a few rules of thumb about picking seeds from different types of plants. Dry seeds, such as lettuce seeds, can be collected straight from the plants once mature, from the seed once the seed pods are dry. This is true for many of the leafy greens. And then wet seeds within fruit pulps need to be picked after ripe and separated from their pulp. Fruits that are usually eaten young and immature, such as zucchinis and cucumbers, need to reach full size to develop seeds. So they need to stay on the plant for another 3 weeks or more. And as you can see, look quite different. So the cucumber on the right, it's quite a bit bigger than you would. And then same for the zucchini. Plants with the seed, like peas, beans, and sunflowers, can stay on the plant until completely dry. Now, on to storing seeds. Just some general tips around storing seeds. So make sure the seeds are properly dry before storing. Seeds that haven't dried properly can become moldy. And also worth noting, larger seeds need longer drying times than smaller seeds. And finally, store seeds in an airtight container in a cool, dark, and dry place. Some people store seeds in the refrigerator or freezer for long-term storage, but it's usually not essential just because seeds, most types of seeds, they last for quite a few years. So you don't really need that extra storage most of the time. So extra time for storage. And don't forget to label your seeds with the crop type, variety name, when you harvested the seeds, and any other useful notes about the plant. So usually things like you want to note potentially how was the climate and how the plant survived to the climate, or the quality of the produce, the size of the plant, any useful traits that you may want to either carry over to the next generation or to keep track of how those traits are carrying over. So how long do seeds last? That depends on the type of seed and storage conditions, but most vegetable seeds last between 3 to 4 years. So this is a useful chart you can find on our website as well, just for reference. Now on to preventing cross-pollination. So cross-pollination occurs when pollen is shared between plants of the same species, but different cultivars or varieties. The resulting seed won't produce true type plants, so it's important to prevent cross-pollination from occurring. Unless, of course, that's exactly what you're trying to do. That's how certain varieties are bred, but worth noting is an experiment. Self-pollinated plants are one way of reducing the risk of cross-pollination, because self-pollinating plants are designed to pollinate themselves, obviously, so they're less likely to cross-pollinate. As an example, lettuce and tomato, as we went through. Another way is obviously to just grow a single variety. It's still possible for cross-pollination to occur from your neighbors, but less likely depending on the size of your garden and the type of plant you're growing, as we'll see in terms of the isolation requirements. So isolating by distance is the most fail-proof way to prevent cross-pollination. Wind-pollinated crops such as beets and spinach have very fine, lightweight pollen that can travel great distances, making the isolation distance required quite long. Insect-pollinated crops may require less distance, but it can vary depending on how wide the insect will forage, with bees foraging over a large area compared to other insect pollinators. Now, physical barriers such as buildings, fences, trees, and shrubs may hinder the flow of wind-borne pollen and may also impact the ability of insect pollinators to carry pollen across. The further an insect travels, there's more chance that the pollen from their body will also fall off. So that reduces their ability to transfer that pollen. The distance recommended can vary from a few meters to many kilometers. So always check the distance required for each plant. When space is limited, isolation by distance may not be possible. So you can physically isolate plants by containing them within fine nets or small bags designed for this. Now, isolation by containment cannot be used for wind-pollinated crops, as the physical barriers can keep the insects out, but pollen carried by wind can still enter and cross-pollinate these crops. Now, also worth noting that plants that are isolated by containment, they will need to be pollinated by hand, since the insects won't be able to get in. And finally, you can also plant varieties in a sequence so that their flowering times don't overlap. Now, This may be difficult to ensure in practice due to natural circumstances. The flowering times may be inconsistent, it depends on the weather, so it may not work 100% of the time. Now, I found this table on the internet, but I couldn't verify its source, so it's here mostly for illustration and as a high-level guide of different methods of pollination for various plants, which can then inform the considerations you may need to make for seed saving. Finally, now that you know everything about seed saving, or everything I know, what are you going to do with all those seeds? Well, swapping seeds is one of the best things you can do so that you can share your locally adapted and well-selected varieties with your neighbors and friends, and also gain access to new varieties from your neighbors and friends. There are hundreds of swapping groups across Australia. You can find many on Facebook groups, your council website, community gardens near your area, or simply Google seed swapping in your area. Also, the Seed Savers website has a handy map with various local groups, so recommend using that as well. Now, if you're looking for certain varieties in your region and you can't find them, you can always try Local Seeds, where we have over 20 growers across different states in Australia. Also, if you want to get more serious about seed saving, you can set up a shop and sell your seeds online on Local Seeds. So thank you. That's all I have for this seed saving workshop. Thanks for joining me.